7 young backpackers vanished along Australia's Hume Highway between 1989 and 1992. Their bodies were later discovered in shallow graves in Belanglo State Forest, bearing signs of extreme violence. This is the story of how a killer named Ivan Milat preyed on vulnerable travelers, and how one man who narrowly escaped became the key to ending his reign of terror. "I knew if I didn't get away, I'd be dead," the survivor would later testify, his voice still shaking years after the encounter. The subsequent investigation would lead authorities through a maze of evidence, culminating in discoveries at Milat's home that would leave even the most hardened detectives disturbed by what they found. Belanglo State Forest was once just a quiet hiking spot in New South Wales. That changed forever on September 19, 1992. 2 runners taking part in an orienteering event stumbled across something hidden among the trees: a concealed corpse. The next morning, police found a second body just 30 meters away. What started as a shocking discovery soon became a nightmare as more bodies emerged from the forest floor. Between September 1992 and November 1993, 7 bodies were pulled from shallow graves throughout the forest. The dense woodland, like a labyrinth of shadows, made the search incredibly difficult. Police teams had to comb through thick brush and uneven terrain to find victims and gather evidence. The first victims identified were Carolyn Clark, 21, and Joanne Walters, 22. Both were British backpackers who'd been missing for 5 months. Their identities were confirmed using dental records. The condition of their bodies revealed the killer's brutality. Joanne had been stabbed 15 times, 4 times in the chest, once in the neck, and 9 times in the back. The back wounds were severe enough to cause paralysis, showing the killer wanted to inflict maximum suffering. Caroline's body told an even more disturbing story. She had been shot 10 times in the head at the burial site. The pattern suggested she had been used for target practice after being killed. The crime scene showed clear signs of a killer who wanted to torture his victims and extend their suffering as long as possible. As investigators continued their grim search, the horror only intensified. In October 1993, a local man collecting firewood discovered another body in a remote section of the forest. Police returned to find the remains of James Gibson and Deborah Everest, an Australian couple. James's skeleton was found curled in a fetal position with 8 stab wounds. A large knife had cut through his upper spine, causing paralysis before death. Stab wounds to his back and chest had punctured his heart and lungs. The attack on Deborah Everest was especially savage. Her skull had been fractured in 2 places, her jaw broken, and knife marks were visible on her forehead. She had also been stabbed in the back. The increasing violence in each murder showed a killer becoming more confident and brutal. The investigation grew more complex when they learned Gibson's camera had been found by the side of a road at Galston Gorge, far north of Belanglo Forest. In December 1989, his backpack turned up in the same area months later. Was the killer moving evidence? Were there multiple crime scenes? The body count continued to rise. On November 1, 1993, a police sweep found Simone Schmadl, a German backpacker. She had at least 8 stab wounds, including 2 that had completely severed her spine. Just 3 days later, police discovered the bodies of Anja Habschied and Gabor Neugebauer, a German couple buried about 50 meters apart. Anja had been decapitated, her skull never found despite extensive searching. Gabor had been shot in the head 6 times. Each crime scene followed a similar pattern. Victims were restrained, tortured, and killed with extreme violence. Many had spinal cords severed from multiple stab wounds, displaying pure rage in physical form. The 7 victims came from different countries, Britain, Germany, and Australia, but shared one crucial vulnerability. All were hitchhikers traveling along the Hume Highway between Sydney and Melbourne. Most were young couples, though Simone Schmedel traveled alone. These were calculated attacks by someone who knew the forest well. The killer selected specific spots for burial, using fire trails for access, but burying bodies just far enough to avoid immediate discovery. The precision of the burial sites, similar attack methods, and care taken to hide evidence all pointed to a predator who planned carefully and returned to his hunting ground with confidence. As the investigation progressed, forensic teams worked to piece together what happened to each victim in their final moments. The autopsy reports painted a picture so disturbing that even veteran medical examiners were shaken. These weren't quick killings. Each showed signs of prolonged torture and suffering. The victims had been methodically restrained before death, with the killer using their own possessions, shoelaces, clothing, drawstrings from sleeping bags, to bind hands behind backs. Forensic analysis revealed marks on wrists and ankles where victims had struggled against these bindings, creating a canvas of desperation etched into their skin. Caroline Clark's hands and arms bore defensive wounds, showing her fight for survival. The killer's response was merciless. Multiple gunshot wounds to her head, a lethal punishment for her resistance. The weapons told a story of calculated violence. Several victims exhibited identical wound patterns matched to a specific Bowie knife with a distinctive blade that left clear signatures in bone and tissue. Others had been shot with a .22 caliber firearm, the small bullets causing devastating internal damage while leaving tiny entry wounds. Some victims showed pressure marks from strangulation, indicating they remained conscious during their ordeal. Many had their spinal cords severed through repeated stabbing, a technique that paralyzed while maintaining awareness, like a sculptor deliberately crafting a living monument to pain. Anya Habshid's remains revealed the escalating brutality. Her body had been decapitated with precision using a sharp blade, yet despite extensive searches, her head was never found. This marked a disturbing evolution in the killer's behavior, suggesting growing appetites with each murder. The crime scenes themselves functioned as macabre galleries. Missing personal belongings, cameras, clothing, camping equipment, and jewelry suggested trophy-taking rather than robbery. The killer collected practical items like backpacks, alongside deeply personal mementos that would only have value as souvenirs of his crimes. Body positioning revealed ritualistic behavior. Rather than killing and departing, the murderer lingered at each scene, arranging victims specifically, some face down, others in fetal positions, exerting control even after death. Multiple victims showed evidence of sexual assault with distinct similarities, indicating attacks focused on dominance and suffering rather than gratification alone. The forensic timeline demonstrated an evolution of technique. Earlier, victims showed a killer developing his method. Later, ones revealed a confident predator who spent more time with victims and inflicted more thorough attacks. Tire tracks and footprints near burial sites, sometimes kilometers apart, indicated transportation of bodies throughout the forest, revealing intimate knowledge of the area and meticulous planning. The emotional toll on forensic teams mounted as evidence accumulated. One examiner confided to colleagues that sleep had become impossible after documenting the systematic torture inflicted on victims. Another requested temporary reassignment, overcome by nightmares featuring the victims' final moments reconstructed from their remains. What troubled investigators most profoundly was evidence of planned hunts rather than impulsive violence. The killer had stalked and selected victims carefully, targeting vulnerable young travelers far from home with minimal contact with family. The spacing between killings, sometimes months apart, painted a portrait of a patient predator who controlled his urges and waited for ideal victims. This wasn't rage-driven violence, but calculated predation by someone who enjoyed the hunt, capture, killing, and aftermath. Someone growing more confident and brutal with each attack. While investigators searched through the forest for clues, the key to solving the case had already happened years earlier. A young British traveler named Paul Onions had come face to face with the killer in January 1990 and lived to tell about it. Onions was backpacking through Australia, hitchhiking along the Hume Highway, the same road where the murder victims had been picked up. When a man pulled over and offered him a ride, Onions didn't think twice. The friendly driver introduced himself as Bill and seemed normal enough at first. As they drove, the conversation shifted. Bill began asking increasingly personal questions about Onion's family and travel plans. His demeanor changed. No longer smiling, he watched Onions with what would later be described as a predatory mode. 40 minutes into the drive, Bill suddenly pulled over. He claimed he needed cassette tapes from the back of the vehicle. When he returned, he held a revolver in one hand and rope in the other. Danger. Immediate. Real. Onions threw his backpack at the armed man and ran. He sprinted into the highway, waved frantically. Cars sped past. No one stopped. Finally, a woman named Joanne Barry pulled over. Onions jumped in, explaining breathlessly that someone had just tried to kill him. Through the rear window, he spotted Bill searching the roadside brush. Barry drove straight to the Bowral police station. At the station, Onions provided a detailed description of the attacker and his vehicle. The police took his statement but didn't treat it as major. They gave him $10 Australian to return to the British High Commission in Sydney and filed his report away. That police report remained forgotten. Onions returned to England, trying to put the frightening experience behind him. Meanwhile, the killer continued his attacks in Belanglo State Forest, claiming victims who weren't as lucky. In 1994, everything changed. Back in Britain, Onions saw news reports about bodies found in an Australian forest. The stories mentioned backpackers disappearing after hitchhiking on the Hume Highway, exactly where his encounter occurred. The connection struck him immediately. Onions contacted Australian authorities, reminding them of his 1990 report. Investigators realized they might have their first living witness. Task Force Air flew Onions back to Australia to assist with the case. Shown a photo lineup, Onions immediately identified Ivan Milat, feeling instant unease at his face. Later, he identified Milat in person as well, providing the connection investigators needed. His recollections proved crucial. Onions remembered specific details about the vehicle interior, weapons, and Milat's behavior that matched evidence from murder scenes and items found during property searches. The pattern was unmistakable. The Hume Highway location, the ride offer, personal questions, and sudden appearance of weapons. The only difference, Onions escaped while others didn't. During Milat's 4-month trial, Onions became the star witness. His testimony provided the human link that connected physical evidence to the suspect. For the jury, hearing from someone who faced the killer and survived made the case viscerally real. After conviction, Onions was offered a substantial reward, more than 200,000 Australian dollars. He declined it. His participation wasn't about money, but justice for the 7 young travelers who never made it home. Paul Onions' quick thinking saved his life in 1990 and ultimately brought a serial killer to justice. His testimony became the crucial breakthrough investigators needed, providing the first solid link between Ivan Milat and his crimes. Without Onions making the connection, Milat might have continued killing for years to come. At 6:30 a.m. on May 22, 1994, Ivan Milat was still asleep when 50 police officers surrounded his home in Eagle Vale, a suburb southwest of Sydney. Operation Air was finally moving to arrest their prime suspect. Officers from the Tactical Operations Unit, wearing body armor and carrying weapons, took position around the modest brick house. They didn't know if Milat was armed or would resist. The raid culminated months of careful investigation. Police had gathered sufficient evidence for a search warrant and needed to surprise Milat to prevent him from destroying potential evidence connecting him to the Belanglo State Forest murders. Detective Superintendent Clive Small, who had led the investigation for nearly 2 years, watched the operation unfold. With international attention focused on Australia's backpacker killings, the stakes couldn't be higher. This raid would either provide the final evidence they needed or force them back to square one. Milat surrendered peacefully, but what lay behind his home's ordinary facade stunned even veteran investigators. The modest house concealed an arsenal of weapons. Police seized multiple firearms, including the .22 caliber rifle suspected in several killings, along with ammunition-matching bullets recovered from the victims. In a ceiling cavity, officers discovered a large Bowie knife with a distinctive blade pattern that forensic experts later confirmed matched the unusual wound patterns on several victims. The weapon aligned perfectly with the stab wounds that had severed spinal cords and caused massive internal damage. The ordinary-looking home harbored extraordinary horrors. Throughout the house, search teams found personal belongings of the victims: backpacks, camping equipment, and clothing that matched descriptions of what the murdered backpackers had carried. These weren't similar items. They were the actual possessions of the dead, macabre trophies of lives cut short. More disturbing was how Milat had integrated these items into his daily life. He slept in a victim's sleeping bag. He stored food in their camping containers. He wore clothing taken from the dead. Joanne Walter's sleeping bag was rolled up in a cupboard. Simone Schmiedel's backpack was hidden away. Cameras belonging to the German victims sat among Milat's possessions. The investigation expanded to homes of Milat's family members, revealing more victim belongings. Milat had distributed some items as gifts, creating an unsettling network of evidence spreading outward from his home. His family members claimed ignorance about the origins of these items, but the evidence portrayed a killer who casually shared his trophies. Forensic examination strengthened the case further. Ballistics tests confirmed the point. .22 rifle found in Milat's home matched bullets recovered from victims. Fabric fibers from crime scenes matched materials in his home and car. Soil samples from his vehicle contained particles consistent with specific areas of Belanglo Forest where bodies had been buried. Throughout the search, Milat maintained his innocence, insisting police were making a mistake. But each item pulled from his home wove another thread in the tapestry of evidence connecting him to the 7 young travelers found in Belanglo Forest. By day's end, police had collected enough evidence to fill a small truck. The items from Milat's property and his relatives' homes created irrefutable connections between him and the victims. Each possession told part of the story, how he selected his victims, killed them, and kept their belongings as souvenirs. The May 22nd raid ended Milat's freedom. Though he would deny the crimes until his death decades later, the mountain of physical evidence made his claims of innocence impossible to believe. The ordinary items found in his home revealed the extraordinary truth about what happened to 7 young travelers who never returned home. On March 26, 1996, Ivan Milat's trial began at the New South Wales Supreme Court. The courtroom buzzed with tension as prosecutor Mark Tedeschi prepared to present the case against the man accused of Australia's worst serial killings. For the next 18 weeks, the court became the center of national attention as Australians followed every detail of the proceedings. Tedeschi built a methodical case against Milat. Calling 145 witnesses, he wove together forensic expertise with physical evidence found in Milat's possession. The courtroom fell silent as police officers displayed items recovered from his home, personal belongings of the victims that Milat had kept as trophies. Scientists connected soil from his vehicle to the exact burial sites in Belanglo Forest, creating an atmosphere of mounting certainty among spectators. Paul Onions delivered what many observers called the trial's defining moment. With cameras capturing every gesture, he calmly identified Milat as his attacker, recounting his escape from the man who called himself Bill. His testimony transformed the clinical forensic evidence into a chilling human narrative that visibly affected jurors, who leaned forward during his account. Media coverage intensified with each new revelation. Television crews camped outside the courthouse, while newspapers published special sections dedicated to the proceedings. The Australian public remained transfixed by the case, with some traveling hours to witness the trial firsthand. Surprisingly, rather than challenging the evidence directly, Milat's defense suggested another family member committed the crimes. They pointed to Richard Milat, Ivan's brother, claiming he could have planted evidence in Ivan's home. This strategy attempted to create reasonable doubt by suggesting police had prematurely focused on Ivan while ignoring other suspects. The jury, however, seemed unmoved by this approach. After methodically examining hundreds of evidence pieces over months, they reached their verdict in just 3 days. On July 27, 1996, they found Milat guilty on all counts: 7 murders and Paul Onions' attempted murder. Justice David Hunt's sentencing reflected the crime's severity: 7 consecutive life sentences for the murders, plus another 18 years for attacking Onions. Milat would never be released. Years later, during a 2004 Australian Story interview, Milat maintained, "My basic defense in my trial was that it wasn't me. I don't know who did it. It was up to them to prove my guilt, not for me to prove my innocence." This position never wavered throughout his incarceration. Behind bars, Milat became notorious as an extremely difficult inmate. Officials transferred him between facilities before placing him in Australia's Supermax prison. His behavior demonstrated manipulation through self-harm, including cutting off his little finger with a plastic knife in 2009 to mail to the High Court, swallowing razor blades, conducting hunger strikes, and attempting multiple escapes. Investigators continued questioning Milat about other disappearances, suspecting additional victims beyond the 7 discovered. Despite numerous interrogations, he admitted nothing. John Marsden, Milat's former lawyer, later made a deathbed statement claiming Milat's sister Shirley had helped kill the British backpackers, raising questions about accomplices. Diagnosed with terminal cancer in May 2019, Milat faced one final police attempt to secure confessions as he lay dying. Even then, he remained silent about his crimes. Ivan Milat died on October 27, 2019, at Long Bay Jail Hospital, still proclaiming innocence after 25 years in prison. He never expressed remorse, denying closure to victims' families. The complete extent of his crimes remains unknown. The backpacker murders changed Australia profoundly. Before Milat, hitchhiking was seen as a normal way to travel the country. After the bodies were found in Belanglo State Forest, that trust vanished. Those 7 young people had their lives stolen, reflected Paul Onions years later. I was the lucky one. Unanswered questions haunt the case. police believe Milat killed others whose bodies remain undiscovered, secrets he carried to his grave in 2019. The case reveals the darkness hidden behind an ordinary facade. The forensic breakthroughs and one survivor's courage brought justice to victims who couldn't speak for themselves. What other secrets did Milat take to his grave? Share your thoughts below.